I'm continually amazed by the immensity of the world that a small poem can conjure. In just a few lines or words, or even just a line break, a poem can travel across time and space. It can jump from the minuscule to the incomprehensible vastness of the universe. And in these inventive leaps, it can create, in our minds, new ideas and images. It can help us see the connections that were, before, invisible. John Shoptaw has conjured such magic with his poem, Near Earth Object, combining the gravity of mass extinction on Earth with the quotidian evanescence of his sprint to catch the bus. I'm John Fiege, and this episode of Chrysalis is part of the Chrysalis Poets series. John Shoptaw grew up in the Missouri Bootheel. He picked cotton, he was baptized in a drainage ditch, and he worked in a lumber mill. He now lives a long way from home in Berkeley, California, where I was lucky enough to visit him last summer. You can see some of my photos from that visit at chrysalispodcast.org, alongside the poem we discussed on this episode. John is the author of the poetry collection Times Beach, which won the Notre Dame Review Book Prize and the Northern California Book Award in Poetry. He is also the author of On the Outside Looking Out, a critical study of John Ashbery's poetry. He teaches at the University of California, Berkeley. John has a new poetry collection coming out soon, also called Near Earth Object. Here is John Shoptaw reading his poem, Near Earth Object.
Near Earth Object. Unlike the monarch, though, the asteroid also slipped quietly from its colony on its annular migration between Jupiter and Mars, enticed maybe by our planetary pollen, as the monarch by my neighbor's slender-leaved milkweed. Unlike it, even when the fragrant Cretaceous atmosphere meteorized the airborne rock, flaring it into what might have looked to the horrid Triceratops like a monarch ovipositing, had the butterfly begun before the period broke off. Not much like the monarch I met when I rushed out the door for the 79, though the sulphurous dust from the meteoric impact off the Yucatan took flight for all corners of the heavens, much the way the next generation of monarchs took wing from the milkweed for their annual migration to the west of the Yucatan. And their unburdened mother took her final flit up my flagstone walkway, froze, and, hurtling downward, impacted my stunned peninsular left foot. Less like the monarch for all this, the globe-clogging asteroid, than like me, one of my kind, bolting for the bus.
Thank you so much. Well, let's start by talking about this fragrant Cretaceous atmosphere that meteorized the airborne rock, which is really the most beautiful way I've ever heard of describing the moment when a massive asteroid became a meteor and impacted the Earth 66 million years ago
Yes.
on the Yucatan Peninsula. And that led to the extinction of about 75% of all species on Earth, including all the dinosaurs. This, of course, is known as the fifth mass extinction event on Earth, and now we're in the sixth mass extinction. But this time the difference is that the asteroid is us, and we're causing species extinctions at even a much faster rate than the asteroid impact did, including the devastation of the monarch butterfly, which migrates between the U.S. and Mexico, not far from the Yucatan, where the asteroid hit. And in your poem, these analogies, metaphors, parallels, they all bounce off one another. Parallels between extinction events, between humans and asteroids, between planets and pollen, between monarch eggs and meteors, between the one I absolutely love is the annular migration of asteroids and the annual migration of monarchs.
Oh, good.
But in some ways, the poem puts forward an anti-analogy, a refutation of these parallels. You know, you say multiple times things like, unlike the monarch, unlike it, not much like the monarch, less like the monarch.
Mm.
So what's going on here? You're giving us these analogies, and then you're taking them away.
The ending of Near Earth Object is a culmination of fanciful comparisons. In this regard, it resembles Shakespeare's sonnet 130, and you probably know this, John, from your English courses in the past. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. And that poem precedes Shakespeare's through a series of negative similarities,
Right.
uh, which I call dissimiles. And at the end, the poem turns on a dime in the final couplet, which is, and yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare.
Nice.
Uh, Now, I didn't have Shakespeare's poem in mind, probably good, but I didn't when I wrote Near Earth Object, but I was certainly familiar with it. And my poem goes through a series of far-fetched similarities between a monarch butterfly and the Chicxulub asteroid. We follow the life cycles of these two, and then a third character, the first person I, enters the poem, comes out the door and then gets, hit by the asteroid monarch on its peninsular left foot. Uh, that turn at the end to comparing the asteroid to me, one of my kind, would seem equally far-fetched. What can I have to do with the globe-clogging asteroid? Before climate change, the answer would have been nothing.
Right.
This poem couldn't have been understood, wouldn't have made sense. Now we're caught out by the unlikely similarity that humankind has the geologically destructive potential of the life-altering asteroid.
Well, and I love that the idea of that turn, um, partially because it so much pulls out the power of poetry and the
Mm,
power of poetic thinking, where so much environmental discourse is around rationality, of
mhm,
making rational, reasonable arguments
mhm.
about this is how things are, this is how things ought to be. Um, but when you have this kind of turn, you're kind of highlighting the complexity and the complicated nature of understanding these things, which are really complex. And it really, in such a short poem, you can encapsulate so much of that complexity, which I think benefits our ultimate understanding of what we're grappling with these environmental questions.
Yeah, that's very well put. I think that you know, for me, this poem is a kind of psychological poem as well, and that I'm playing on the reader's expectations. And I think the reader probably has less and less faith in this persona who keeps being lured into these weird comparisons between the
Uh-huh.
asteroid and the monarch butterfly. And then at the end, we're thinking, well, this too is absurd. And then we're caught up, like I say, and that's the psychological turn. Early on, when people, and people still, many people doubt uh, the existence of climate change, it's just a map because of a matter of scale. How
Mhm.
can we affect Mother Nature?
Right.
It's so big, it's so overwhelming. It does what it wants. We're just little,
Right.
features on this
Spec.
big, big planet.
Right.
Uh, so it's so counterintuitive. So that's why, yes, we grapple, and this poem is meant to take you through that kind of experience that without saying that explicitly.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that, yeah, it sets this apart from both a psychological essay and an environmental essay.
The other line I wanted to pull out of this is slender-leaved milkweed, which I love, and there's a musicality to it. How do you think about that sonorous aspect of the poem and the musicality and the rhythm of it.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's one of the ways I believe that poetry is like music, that we do have a musicality. And one of the wonderful things about poetry and music is that it works below the level of meaning, the way a song often does. You know, you often will, before you even know all the words, will get the song
Right,
and understand what the song is communicating. And sometimes I'm communicating delicacy in slender-leaved milkweed, not only by the image, but by the sound. It's a quiet line. Whereas uh, when I say airborne rock, that's very tight
right,
and very definitive, like globe clogging asteroid, or bolting for the bus.
right.
These are dynamics that I can play with, and I can accentuate them by changing the rhythms, making two very hard, plosive, as in explosion, B sounds, far from each other. And this is something that poetry can do that prose can't so well, and that,
Hmm.
you know, it's one reason why you have soundtracks in film to help bring things across.
Yeah, and in the midst of some of these grand images that you have in the poem of like monarch colonies and asteroid colonies, there's also your presence and
Mm,
the glimpse of them of what seems like a moment in your life potentially. You run out the door and catch the 79 bus, which goes through Berkeley where you live, and you encounter a monarch butterfly, which also has a California migration route. Um, the monarch impacts your, as you say, stunned peninsular left foot. And so now you're shifting the metaphor from human as asteroid to human as Yucatan Peninsula,
mm,
which is the site of the impact. And the way you play with scale in this poem, I find quite remarkable, moving from the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars to your foot. Um, and and your peninsular foot makes me feel as if humans are both the perpetrators of the sixth mass extinction, but also one of its victims. Um, and so I was curious, was this moment with the butterflies something that actually happened? And how do you understand it in relation that, this small moment with the butterfly, how do you understand that in relation with the broader context of the poem?
yeah, thank you. I think one way I proceed in poetry, which uh, is um, something like chance operations that John Cage and poets following John Cage would use, is I become very receptive to things happening around me.
Mm,
And if something happens around me while I'm writing a poem, then it gets to come in the poem. At least I'm receptive to that possibility. And as I was going for the bus one day on the walkway, I came across a dead monarch butterfly. I was very startled to see it, and I thought, my God, that needs to be in the poem. This butterfly has fallen out of the sky like the asteroid, and and it turned out that's the third thing I needed to link our personal small felt scale with the astronomical and the geological time scale. And it's exactly a problem of scale, both in space and time. I'm constantly zooming in and zooming out. I actually wrote one poem in which I compared this kind of surreal or unreal feeling that we have, if not a knowledge, but a feeling of climate change behind the weather as the Hitchcock zoom.
mm.
where the
Hmm.
background suddenly comes into the foreground.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like, the problem of climate change is a problem of scale. Like it's so foreign to our kind of everyday human senses of what is danger and what is something we should be concerned about or care about. And that problem of scale, both spatially and temporally, it really prevents us from wrapping our heads around what it means and how to respond.
It does. That's our challenge. I take it as my challenge, the kind of poetry I write, and I think of myself as well, I think of poetry as a science of feelings. And one of the feelings I'm thinking about and trying to understand and work through is denial.
Mm,
People usually think of denial as refusal. You refuse to admit, but look at the facts, just face the facts. But as you say, climate is on such a different scale. It's often a problem of incomprehension.
right. Yeah, and I think this idea of denialism, I mean, we tend to talk about it in very narrow terms of people of particular political persuasions deny the existence of climate change. And that's one, like, very narrow view
That's
of
right.
denialism. But it really pervades everything in our culture. Anyone who eats a hamburger or flies on a plane or even turns on their heat in their
Yes.
house, is kind of implicated in some system of denial, um, that ultimately our society is completely unsustainable, and we have to function. We have to move forward, even if we know how problematic those various things are, and so just living in the world requires some sense of denialism.
It does. If you think of the word we commonly use today, adaptation,
Right.
that's really another word for denial. If you see what I mean, we're moving into
Mm,
partially accepting the reality as it is so we can live into it. And again, if we think of relativity, flying less, not giving up flying, uh, emitting less, not stopping all emissions on a dime,
right.
but moving as fast as we possibly can. These are things we can do and without being incapacitated by despair. And again, I think, hope and despair are two other very fundamental concepts that poets, if they're serious about feeling, can think about and think through and help people re-understand.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I love this idea of impurity that you bring in, not just with poetry, but I feel like environmentalism in general is really susceptible to this kind of ideology of purity, and it becomes about checking all the boxes of you know lifestyle and beliefs and votes and all kinds of things where the solutions don't come with some kind of attainment of purity. They
That's
come
right.
with a shift of a huge section of the way the culture works. And that's never going to be perfect or consistent or anything. It's going to be imperfect and it's going to be partial, but it can still move.
That's right. So when people say net zero, carbon offsets, recycling, this is all greenwashing,
Right.
I say, listen to the word all. Yes, there is some greenwashing going on there. There is some self-promotion and maintenance of one's corporate profile at work, but there's
Mhm.
also good being done.
Right.
You can recycle aluminum and you get 90% aluminum back. You can recycle plastic, you get 50% back, but you still get 50% back.
Right. Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah, totally. Well, in the poem, you also give life to what we ordinarily see as inanimate objects. So let me reread a section of the poem. Enticed maybe by our planetary pollen, as the monarch by my neighbor's slender-leaved milkweed, unlike it even when the fragrant Cretaceous atmosphere meteorized the airborne rock, flaring it into what might have looked to the horrid Triceratops like a monarch ovipositing. So, in your words, the lifeless, inanimate asteroid is given life and a soul, really. Why take it in that direction?
To make it real, to make it real for us. And you will see poets giving a voice to storms, to extreme weather events, seeing things from potentially destructive point of view, and that's part of what I was doing here is seeing things fancifully from uh, the meteor's point of view, but I wanted to give that personification to make the link that this is personal. What's happening at this scale is still personal. It still has to do with us and links with us.
Yeah, and you wrote this great piece for Poetry Magazine called "Why Eco Poetry," and you bring up these topics a bunch, and there's one line um, I really love. You say, to empathize beyond humankind, eco-poets must be ready to commit the pathetic fallacy and to be charged with anthropomorphism. Could you explain this concept of John Ruskin's pathetic fallacy and how you've seen these issues play out?
Yeah, I think Ruskin had uh, certainly a good sense of what the natural world was, and many artists and poets' laziness when it came to uh, the describing the natural world. Uh, Storms were always raging, winds were always howling. The words were always the same. That's really what he was getting at, and I appreciate that.
Ah,
You want to make these things real,
right.
um, but there is a place for pathetic fallacy. But on the other hand, uh, strategically, we often need for that monologue of the lyric poem to be overtaken by this larger voice, almost like a parental voice from on high, speaking to us and saying, "Listen to me. This is real. This is happening. I'm out here."
Right.
So, and you've forced me to take over your poem and talk to you about this. Anthropomorphism is a related phenomenon, and it's a word that um, I, I still find useful in making us really consider and experience the outside world, the world particularly of other creatures, as they actually are. Um, However, it's a belief. It's not a scientific idea. And the idea being that we are ascribing qualities, human qualities, to animals or plants or even inanimate objects like meteors, when in fact, when it comes to animals, for instance, we're often identifying qualities, behaviors, actions, motivations we share. Anyone who owns pets knows they have a range of feelings that to say, my dog is happy, my dog is bored,
Right.
my dog is feeling bad because it feels it's disappointed me in some way. You know these things are real, and you need to act accordingly to keep things going along
Right.
in the canine human partnership that you have going there.
Yeah, Descartes must not have had any dogs. or cats, or
must not have had,
or
and you
ever encountered
yes,
another animal besides a human in his life.
that's right, that's right. It's partly, one feels, well, we how can we know that other world? We shouldn't be so arrogant in our knowledge, and so it seems like we're being modest, and it's a good thing, and we have this anthropological attitude toward the relativity of, you know, consciousness. On the other hand, it's a form of denial.
Right.
Anthropomorphism is a form of denial of what we share, and poets need to overcome that denial and
You mean
reach out.
anti-anthropomorphism is a kind of
I
denial.
do,
Yeah.
I do,
Yeah.
yeah. I know we don't have the language for it. We don't have that word, John. That's
Right.
part of the problem.
Anthropomorphism, it just slips right off your tongue.
That's right. Um,
Well, and this point you make about anthropomorphism reminds me really strongly of a story I've heard Jane Goodall tell many times. She was hired to observe chimpanzees in the wild, and she gave them names, but she was reprimanded by many in the scientific community who said a researcher should use numbers to identify chimps or any other animals they're studying because scientists must be dispassionate and not confuse animal behavior with human behavior. And she identifies one of her most significant contributions to science as recognizing the individuality and the personality and really the souls of non-human animals. Um, and that recognition fundamentally changed our scientific understanding of chimps and other animals and allowed these massive breakthroughs in the field. And you seem to be arguing that with poetry, we're in a similar place in relation to the earth, where we need to find a new language that allows us to empathize more profoundly with the other than human residents of the planet. Does that sound does that sound right to you?
Very much, and really with thinking and realizing that I'm an animal as a human being, uh, brought on a conceptual paradigm shift for me, unlike anything I've experienced in my
Mm,
adult life. Everything changed.
mm,
And when I think, well, what do the animals think about this? How are
right.
they dealing with climate change? Etc. It's always revelatory for me to ask that kind of question. I'm looking at a book by Jane Goodall right now on my shelf called The Book of Hope,
Mm,
and something I've been thinking about a lot in relation to this because animals have not given up and they don't give up until they have to.
right.
An animal, let's say a songbird in the clutch of a hawk, knows it's over and you shut down in order to minimize the pain and suffering.
Right.
They know that, but they know not to do that prematurely. And I think, you know, often we think of hope and despair as antonyms, but they're very intertwined with each other. I mean, the word despair contains hope. It means the loss of hope, and as there is a sense of false hope where you keep hoping beyond the point of hope, where reality tells you there's no point in hoping.
Mhm.
There's also what I would call a premature despair.
Mm,
Um, I don't know if you've run across the Stockdale paradox,
no.
but I find it helpful. There's a writer, Jim Collins, who talked to Admiral Stockdale, who was taken prisoner of war in Vietnam, and he survived through 7 years and several incidents of torture. And he said he was asked by Jim Collins, "Well, who didn't survive?" And he said, "Well, the optimists." He said the optimists were saying, "Oh, we're going to be let out by Christmas." And then when that didn't happen, he'd say, "Oh, well, we'll be released by Easter." And when that doesn't happen and Christmas comes around again, they died of a broken heart.
Oh, wow.
And for
Yeah, I think
him, the parad
I have heard that in broad terms. I don't remember that story though. That's great.
yeah, and the paradox is that You have hope which is resolute. It's not pie in the sky hope, but it's hope that faces reality. And it's hope that is more like courage. It's more like resoluteness. Hope is not easy, and it does not deny despair, and even allows you to relax for a moment and
Right.
maybe weep, maybe say, "Oh my God, it's over," before you come back and say, "No, I'm still here. I can still help. I can do what I can."
Right. Right. Yeah, and I love how you say that eco poetry can be anthropomorphic, but it cannot be anthropocentric, which flips both of these assumptions that are so deeply embedded in our culture.
Yeah,
And
maybe I could say something about anthropocentrism.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Uh, it's a word that I think is maybe in the dictionary now, but maybe not so familiar a word. But thinking of everything in the world are revolving around us, and the universe, we're the universe's reason for being.
Right.
That would be the kind of the strongest sense of anthropocentrism.
Another form of heliocentrism.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. That's why one reason why I, at the beginning of near Earth objects, see things from the asteroid's point of view,
Right. Yeah.
to give that kind of scale, but also shifting perspective. On the other hand, lyric poetry is inevitably anthropocentric.
Right.
We as humans are inevitably anthropocentric. So our um, moving out of anthropocentrism in poetry is always going to be relative and strategic and rhetorical and persuasive, never absolute.
Right. Totally. Well, another interesting issue you confront in the article is didacticism and the risks of moralism in eco poetry. And in talking about this, you evoke two poets. The first is Archibald MacLeish, the renowned modernist poet, who wrote, "A poem should not mean, but be." But then you write, "Poetics wasn't always this way. For Horace, a poem both pleases and instructs." And I feel like this issue of moralism and didacticism goes way beyond poetry to encompass environmentalism more broadly.
Mm, mm, mm.
How can a poem please and instruct without preaching and being didactic?
Yes, that's a question where there's no single answer. Every poem, for me, poses the question differently, and part of the excitement, part of the experimental nature of poems is you find a new answer every time to that problem. How not to be preachy, but to leave readers in a different place at the end of the poem than they were at the beginning. You know, in my poem, to move people from unlike to less like.
Right.
And if I can get them there in a poem, I have moved them in a way, and that's enough for me.
Well, let's look at the end of the poem. You write, "Less like the monarch for all this, the globe clogging asteroid, than like me, one of my kind, bolting for the bus." It seems in some ways that you might be settling on an analogy in the midst of all these intersecting parallels. The asteroid is less like the monarch and more like us who have killed the monarchs. Um,
Mhm.
where do you feel like the poem lands in terms of making a statement like this and offering up many conflicting ideas that readers have to contemplate for themselves?
Well, what would I say? I think when it comes to guilt or responsibility, as I was saying before, we don't want to think in absolute terms where I'm as guilty as Exxon. I am not,
Right,
but I still am.
right,
I am still part of this world. That monarch butterfly died naturally after it planted its eggs. Its days, her days were numbered. So that is part of this. But yet I do want to say, and this is part of, I think, part of the one of the gestures of poetry in the Anthropocene, the era of climate change, a gesture of saying, I take responsibility. I take responsibility. And this is one of the problems of saying, I give up. There's no point in doing anymore.
right.
Uh, we don't have that option. It's irresponsible to give up, to ever give up. So uh, I still, though, want to say even something that has global potential for damage is connected with me, good little me, taking taking the bus because I'm one of humankind, and we have this destructive potential, and on the other hand, we have this corresponding responsibility.
Yeah. And looking back on the title of the poem, it feels as if we as humans have what you might call like a dual contradictory existence, as both we're both earth objects and
Mhm.
we're near earth objects. What do you what do you think about that?
Yes, I do. I like that uh, ambiguity. I I think one of the chances and the happy accidents of the monarch appearing in my poem as I was writing it, without planning to have a monarch in it. One of the accidents was to take the monarch also as a near Earth object,
Mm,
and a near Earth object is one of these scientific concepts of it's usually a very large object like a comet or an asteroid entering the Earth's gravitational pull
right.
with potentially hazardous effects. But it can be anything near the Earth, and if you take object also in the title as a goal, my object is to bring us near the Earth
Mm, mm,
and not have us simply abstract ourselves. How would we do that? We abstract ourselves by saying we're special.
mm.
We're
I really
special.
like that too, because that also ties into this question of scale. You know, you can be near the Earth by being, 1,000 miles away, or you can be near the Earth by hovering, centimeters over it. And it can be conceptual too. You can be oblivious to the fact that you live on Earth, or you can be extremely aware that you are of and within and near the Earth at all times.
That's right.
Yeah, I really like that. That's beautiful. Well, I love how there's so many meanings that come from this tiny little poem.
Well, may I
It's so
say,
great.
I was not in a godlike position with this poem. For me, poems are like gardens in that they're less intended than tended, and they grow of their own. And I just try to be the best collaborator with the poem that I can, and not to ignore when it's trying to tell me something like, I need a monarch in here,
Right,
not to
right.
ignore that.
Yeah. Well, can you end by reading the poem once again?
I can, thank you very much. Near Earth object. Unlike the monarch, though, the asteroid also slipped quietly from its colony on its annular migration between Jupiter and Mars, enticed maybe by our planetary pollen, as the monarch by my neighbor's slender-leaved milkweed. Unlike it, even when the fragrant Cretaceous atmosphere meteorized the airborne rock, flaring it into what might have looked to the horrid triceratops like a monarch ovipositing had the butterfly begun before the period broke off. Not much like the monarch I met when I rushed out the door for the 79, though the sulphurous dust from the meteoric impact off the Yucatan took flight for all corners of the heavens, much the way the next generation of monarchs took wing from the milkweed for their annual migration to the west of the Yucatan. And their unburdened mother took her final flit up my flagstone walkway, froze, and, hurtling downward, impacted my stunned, peninsular left foot. Less like the monarch, for all this, the globe-clogging asteroid, than like me, one of my kind, bolting for the bus.
John, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been fabulous.
Thank you, John, for the opportunity, and I loved conversing with you.
Thank you so much to John Shoptaw. Go to our website at chrysalispodcast.org, where you can read his poem, Near Earth Object, and also see some of my photographs of him at his house in Berkeley, and find our book and media recommendations. This episode was researched by Elena Sebulash and Brody Muchler, and edited by Brody Muchler and Sophia Chang. Music is by Danielle Rodriguez Vivas. Mixing is by Sarah Westrich. If you enjoyed my conversation with John, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Contact me anytime at chrysalispodcast.org, where you can also support the project, subscribe to our newsletter, and join the conversation.